NewGenGamers.com.
Namco.
Now, what many people don't know, this is Soul Blade. And this was the very first game in the series of Soul Calibur. This is where Soul Calibur was born, was this game.
I've actually never seen this. I've heard of it, but this is my first time seeing it.
You'll see a lot of familiar characters like Mitsurugi and Taki. I think Taki's in this one.
And you'll get to see that,
Sung Mina, Boldo.
You'll get to see Siegfried, the pre-Nightmare character.
Cool. So, yeah, a lot of people probably aren't aware of this, that there was a game before Soul Calibur, because Soul Calibur, I think, took off more than this one, but this is a Namco fighter and one of the earlier successful 3D fighters. Getting a little feedback here.
Tell me, Ray,
yes.
Is that Sophia girl? Is she Scottish?
No, she just happens to be wearing a kiltish dress. And as most fans of Soul Calibur are aware, she has a very short skirt. And for some reason, a lot of gamers tend to try to manipulate the camera, as they did in Tomb Raider.
You know, this is really impressive because, you know, I see the skirt moving, and for an early 3D game, getting the hair and the clothing to move around like that is pretty impressive. They did a good job with this.
Yeah, they always put a lot into this this series.
Yeah, it's always stunning. You know, Soul Calibur, when it came out, was probably one of the most impressive games on the market. I remember seeing, you know, the arcade version, and I don't think there was anything that impressive.
At least not on the early Dreamcast.
No, not during that era.
Now, as you see, it's a weapon-based fighter. You can sidestep.
Well, now, you got the weapons here. This is a lot like a lot of fighters, but the weapons always made this a really cool series.
Yeah, they changed it up from your traditional fighter, and you have weapon-based combos. Is basically the meat and potatoes of this one. And they would have the sword clashes, and you'd have to try to break the clashes. And you can see he's blocking there.
And here's Siegfried, as Luke was saying about.
Who later became Nightmare, for those that play it nowadays.
And Nightmare is a beast.
One of the toughest characters in the game.
Yeah, he moves a little slower in the later games than he does in this. I think for the sword being so huge, he shouldn't be able to have the speed that he does. But aside from that, it's fairly decent. I'm highly impressed with the abilities that they've put into this.
And for this game actually coming out in 95, 96, one of the earliest games for the PlayStation, the graphics are pretty good.
Oh, the graphics are phenomenal for the early PlayStation days.
And here we go. Sony was the first one to successfully have a string of 3D games. You know, they were competing against the Saturn, and the Saturn's craptacular, I'm going to use that term again, 3 processors.
The Saturn was more built for 2D. It was like a 2D powerhouse.
Well, they intended it to work as a 3D system. I mean, that's what they thought with the 3 processors, that, you know, they would be able to do all these impressive calculations, but it just turned into too much trouble to try and to manage that. Where the PS1 used basically sensible hardware and a pretty fast CD-ROM drive for the time. It was 2x.
Well, the crazy thing about the Saturn is, and I'll get more into this story when we actually play it, but they originally were just planning on using one processor with it. And it was one of those last-minute decisions where they wanted to throw in the 3 processors. That's why they didn't work so well in conjunction with each other, because they just pulled them off the shelf.
Well, there you go. I mean, the PlayStation was essentially built in conjunction with Nintendo, and Sony basically just sold it themselves.
Yeah, one of the story of the early, how the PlayStation came to fruition is probably one of my favorite stories of the game industry.
It's full of lore and deception and dirty double-crossing.
And just basically the 2 companies screwing each other over repeatedly. It started all when Sony, Ken Kutaragi in particular, wanted to make a sound chip for the Super Nintendo.
Well, okay, this is where it starts off in just bizarre circumstance. Ken Kutaragi saw his daughter playing Famicom and thought that it would be a good idea for Sony to sell video games. Now, Sony didn't agree with this, and Ken didn't get their okay to try and sell things to video game companies. So Ken Kutaragi went out on his own and worked out and demonstrated this sound chip for Nintendo. And the deal was set up without Sony's knowledge. Now, any normal person would be fired for such a brash move. But Ken Kutaragi is a brash character, and that's why he's entered into video game lore. And so he made this deal with Nintendo, and the CEO at the time should have fired him. There's no reason they shouldn't have fired him, but the guy whose name was Norio Oga, he saw something in young Ken Kutaragi because he had gotten his job with Sony by writing an angry letter about how much their tape recorder sucked. That's how the then CEO and co-founder Morita-san read the letter and said, "Okay, you think you can do better? Do it." And they hired him on, and he worked his way up and became the CEO. So he apparently saw this in Kutaragi and said, "All right, you want to make this deal? You want to make it work? Fine. You're now the head of our video game division." And in 1993, Sony Computer Entertainment Incorporated was founded. But let's step back again.
Back to
this sound chip. Ken successfully sold the sound chip to Nintendo, and the Super Nintendo had the Sony, it was called the SPC 700 sound processing unit.
And if anyone remembers the Super Nintendo, how the Super Nintendo's sound worked, it was the best sound you would find on a cartridge-based system. Probably even better than the N64's at points. It
was a really interesting sound chip. The way it worked was it was almost a separate processor in the way the CPU and GPU are, and it would handle the sound data as programs, and it basically was a standalone running sound processor that would then send it back to the main processor to output it. And it was really impressive. So this is Console Wars of the Past. Let's continue on.
We're going to continue with this story, but we're going to change our game here.
し定めを切り開く伝説の剣を求めてプレイステーション版武器格闘アクションナムコソウルエッジ
2J Gamers.com